you ever speak to me like that again, better be wearing a cup.
Baby steps.
One break, I'm in
Okay, friends, let's everybody take your positions, please. Here we go. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, rolling. Dave!
And
Dave!
Unchained.
welcome to Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
And we are at episode 58. So we are still in the month of October. Obviously, this is sort of a unusual month because we had an early, unfortunate emergency podcast because of Eddie Van Halen's passing, and we are still mourning Ed's loss and will be for a long time. But a lot of this podcast is a kind of a continuation of the last one. Obviously, Eddie's passing will dominate the news and the letters, and we even have guests that we interviewed on the day Eddie passed. So, you know, this is going to go on, and Dave and I are also doing a special dedication to Ed, the top 10 Eddie Van Halen moments for each of us. So we have so much to talk about and so much to get into, so we're going to get right into Van Halen news.
Van Halen.
Well, obviously, folks, the news is dominated by Ed, of course, and the reactions after the passing of Edward Van Halen. Obviously, the last time you heard from us, we were speaking on the day Eddie passed, right? It was that day. So,
It was.
So this is kind of a bit of the fallout. Obviously, we're still in the same month, and Eddie's been gone for a while now. I want to start off with Wolf and Val have been tweeting in a memorial sense, not so much writing as much as tweeting out photos. So it's been very heartwarming to see the different tweets and Instagrams, family photos of Ed through the years. I think they're kind of showing the other side, I guess, to Eddie Van Halen, the kind of warm and friendly family guy, as opposed to, you know, the legendary musician that he is. And both are obviously grieving very heavily. We are not to exclude Janie, of course, his wife. However, she's been a little on the more quiet side in terms of those things. But we found out a little more about Ed's illness, as we expected. Dave had mentioned that on the last podcast. We'll probably find out some more information, and we have. Apparently, Ed had suffered a stroke a few months back, and he was in the hospital for the past few weeks in the cancer wing. The cancer apparently spread from his throat to his spine and his brain, and they managed his pain until he passed in his sleep. And there's no word currently, as we are recording this, about his funeral. I had heard through Valerie's brother, it was noted, I think, on the links that he's going to be cremated and there's going to be some sort of funeral in a few weeks. Didn't you hear that, Dave?
Yeah, something to that effect.
Yeah. Well, one thing that came out since we last spoke was Mike and Sam made a video. So Mike and Sam, Michael Anthony and Sammy Hagar, they were obviously deep into rehearsals for Sammy's birthday bash, his 73rd birthday bash in Catalina Island. So this was going on during rehearsals, and Sam and Mike paused from their work and obviously did a video. And Sammy had said, for Mike and I, it was like getting hit by a Mack truck. It kind of took the wind out of our sails. Mike said it made the occasion bittersweet. It was very surreal, but the whole death of Eddie hasn't sunk in yet. Sam said playing right now, he thought, thank God for this, meaning the music. I will never play with Eddie again, but the music will live on forever. And I'll sing this music for as long as I live. And Michael Anthony said, we love you, Eddie. They posted a clip of the rehearsal where they did a moment of silence in the concert where they paused and then went into Right Now with sort of a dedication to Eddie. Michael seemed a little, I don't know, a little unemotional or detached. Maybe he's just stunned. I don't know. Sam seemed...
Actually, I thought he was emotional.
Oh, really?
I thought he was trying to keep it together.
Well, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. Sam seemed a little more squirmy. You know what I mean? Like, I guess, well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's got to be a little awkward that, you know, he's doing this concert. I mean, it's sort of a difficult time, you know, to be doing. But also,
surreal is the word.
Surreal.
I mean, it just can't be easy. Yeah. I'm sure. You know, you're having this big birthday bash.
Yeah.
you know, 2 days ago,
Right.
you know, Ed passes away.
Right.
You know, you're trying to put on a good show, but
Right.
there's this shadow hanging overhead.
Exactly. It's hard to figure. Dave and I are going to get into that whole birthday bash. We both viewed it just hours ago. It's sort of a touchy situation, but I also think it served as a nice memorial because the music does live on, and I think Eddie would want the music to live on. One of the most interesting things that came out since we last spoke to you guys was the Howard Stern tribute. So Howard Stern on his program did a tribute to Eddie Van Halen. He opened up the hour with Eruption, which Howard has always marveled at. Howard has always been a huge Van Halen fan, so he loves Eddie. He knew Eddie personally, and he's had Dave on and Sam. He's been in the middle of the whole Van Halen thing for years. So he tried to get Sammy on the program, but apparently Sammy didn't want to come on the air, but he sent a letter. The letter that Sammy had wrote to Howard said, "I would love to share with you that Eddie and I have been texting, and it's been a love fest since we started communicating earlier this year. And we both agreed not to tell anyone because of all the rumors it would stir up about a reunion, etc. And we both knew that wasn't going to happen. He also didn't want anyone to know about his health. He stopped responding to me about a month ago, and I figured it wasn't good. I reached out to him one more time last week, and he didn't respond. I figured it was a matter of time, but it came way too soon." So that came from Sam, which he delivered to Howard. I'm glad that Sam got some closure there with Ed, and it was nice to hear. I don't know if Michael Anthony got that closure, which is kind of sad. And, you know, what can I say? Perhaps the friendship overcame the business end there with Sam, and, you know, they had a lot of, tough business stuff that they were dealing with. But interesting enough, Sammy, in promoting his birthday bash, did an interview with Angie Taylor on Chicago's 95.5 FM, and this kind of choked me up a little bit, actually. He said when he called Ed, and apparently he ended up calling Ed because of the comedian George Lopez, who was a golfing buddy of Ed's, and he's also a friend of Sam, and he told Sam, call Ed. And he gave him his direct number. Apparently, Sam had been trying to get in touch with Ed using different avenues. I guess he called Alex and all kinds of different ways to get in touch with Ed, but he didn't have his direct cell, I guess. You know, you got to consider the situation. The last time they spoke was 2004, and things have changed. People have different numbers, and I guess he couldn't get in touch with him, but George Lopez gave him Eddie's direct cell, and he said when he called him after years of not speaking back in February, maybe it was January, he said before COVID hit, he had spoke to Eddie. He said, and Eddie said, "What took you so long?" Which is kind of sad. It really kind of choked me up to read that because, and it said Sammy put a big smile on his face. He said, "Oh my God, don't even ask me." And but he was very touched by that. Ed said it was kind of like, "Hey, I've been waiting, almost to speak to him." So what did you think of that, Dave, when you heard that?
Yeah, that was bittersweet.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, but at the end of the day, at least they got to talk and iron out things.
Yeah.
So that's the good news.
Yeah. Sam said, that looking back, he said this to Angie Taylor on Chicago's 95.5 FM. He said, looking back, if we hadn't come to terms with that feud and we were having for the 2004 reunion tour, I wouldn't have been able to come to grips with his death. I would have been way too much for me because I'm still grieving my ass off, but the grieving is starting to make, he said, it feels like they had a great thing. The music will live on forever and beyond him. He said he'll sing it for the rest of his life. When I'm gone, hopefully some young bands will come up and play the music, and you could always play it in your home. So I think it was some sort of sense of closure for the guy and realized that, they did have that special time together and that they both sort of mended fences. But it's nice to know that happened. But I was wondering about that when I was looking at the video with Mike, if Mike didn't get that. I don't know. That's
I haven't heard anything about Mike.
Yeah, Mike's so quiet.
I really don't know. I'd like to hope so, but I just don't know.
Yeah, he doesn't really talk much, Mike. The interesting thing I thought was very touching was Gene Simmons was on Entertainment Tonight. And Gene, obviously we all know, has a long history with Van Halen, being that he was kind of there before Ted Templeman, trying to help the band out, putting forth a demo for them. Gene Simmons said that he remembers going to see them at the Starwood and sitting in the VIP area, and hearing Eddie, he said, sounded like 3 or 4 guitar players playing in harmony. He says, I never heard anything like it. He said today was heartbreaking for millions of fans and guitar players all over the world, and he was just honored to witness the greatness before it exploded all over the world. He says, no one has ever been like him. He says, not since Hendrix has anyone had this effect on the guitar community. He also shared a time when Eddie had called him up and said he wasn't very happy in the band and wanted to see if he could join Kiss. So he kind of legitimized that whole rumor, and he says, nope. He took him out to lunch. He says, you can't leave your band. It's your band. He says, you got to stick it out. And then Eddie played him Jump. Him and Paul heard it and said they knew it was a huge hit and he was on to something big. He said Eddie was his own guide to the very end, very humble, very simple, unaffected by the whole fame thing, and he was never out to impress anybody, but he could outplay everyone. He said, above everything, he was a beautiful soul, and that was really his biggest achievement. So very heartwarming words from Gene, who's not exactly the fuzziest guy in the world.
Yeah, it was really, you really got to see a human side of it.
Oh yeah. This he was shaken. I mean, you could actually see visibly that he was shaken by this whole thing and was really taken by the whole situation. And now, I've been following all these people. So, Steve Lukather, as we all know, longtime friend of Ed's, right? Steve Lukather, Luke, as we all know him, from Toto, okay? He was on the Eddie Trunk Show, and they have been friends for 40 years, since their 20s, he says. And he says, we went through a lot of life together. And he says, I really miss my friend. He said, when he first heard Van Halen, before he knew Ed, he says, what planet is this guy from? He couldn't believe it. He says his playing was raw but brilliant. He said he didn't look at the instrument like a normal person would, which is interesting. He also said that they played the California World Music Festival on the same bill. Apparently that was the one where they parachuted in, and he thought that was great. He described Ed as a warm, happy guy. He said he was very often invited to his house, that he lives down the street from him, and they started up a really strong friendship. They played golf together. He sang background vocals on Can't Stop Loving You and Top of the World because he was hanging around at the studio. But they never really recorded anything together, except Eddie played on his Christmas record, which was a shred version of Joy to the World, and he also played on his solo album Twist the Knife, on his first solo album, and he also played, I think Ed played on the Jeff Porcaro tribute show, which is the drummer from Toto, passed away, and he said Ed would always show up when you least expect it. He said he didn't like to talk about his illness, but he did very often go to Europe to get treatments with Al, his brother. He said he hasn't seen Ed in a year, which is telling because, Steve was a close friend, and he didn't want to, share any private stories, and he says there won't be any book about me and Eddie, he goes, but there was no secrets, he said with Ed. He said the magic was him, and he really says he doesn't think Al will play behind another guitar player, which is interesting. And he also said that Ed deserves to be right next to Les Paul and Jimi Hendrix in terms of innovators with the guitar. So, big words from an incredible musician himself, that's for sure. His comment about Al is very interesting. If you think about it, like we always talked about in this podcast, Al, you never saw Al jamming with anybody. You saw Ed.
I really think he's right. I really think, this is it.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be a tribute show.
Maybe.
And maybe Al might come out, if there's a tribute show, in this COVID world, who the heck knows, right?
Yeah, who knows, man.
I could see him coming out for that, but after that, you're not going to see Al. I mean, he's retired, right?
Yeah,
for all intents and purposes, what's he going to do, start another band now?
Right, exactly. It also, does he want to be touring? He's probably, if anything, maybe he'll manage Van Halen Inc. I mean, you just don't know.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, there's plenty to do there if he wanted. Another interesting character, of course, always colorful, Sebastian Bach. All right, so Sebastian's wild and crazy. Sebastian is a hardcore Van Halen fan. He's like a total geek for Van Halen. So interesting stuff here, though, and this is why I bring it up. Sebastian, much like Roth, and he's very influenced by David Lee Roth. Like, he's like a human hurricane, you know what I mean? Like, he's just funny. He's just so full of energy, and he said, Van Halen! It was like a rally cry. That he goes, when he was a kid, that people, they would just say Van Halen.